Hello, everybody. Welcome back to those who are attending the online conference. I'm just going to adjust my view slightly because I'd like you to be able to see those of us who are speaking today. You had your first exclusive online session yesterday, early evening with John Opie, and I hope that all went well for you. Today's session is going to be based on developing and activating the information you hold in your organisations as an archive and how you can make use of that. Just for a few points of practicality before I get on to introducing everybody. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen you have a Q&A button. If you wish to make any comments during the presentations, or if you want to ask any questions in advance for the sort of discussion session that will follow the presentations, please put your questions or your points within the questions box. And we have someone who's keeping an eye on the questions box for you and will be directing us to that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists today. First of all, I'll just say we have a silent panelist with us, who is Tuan, who is on our team at Acme. He's going to be looking after all of your questions and keeping an eye on things for you to make sure that your voices get heard later on in the discussion. I'm Marion Crick. I'm the Records and Archive Manager for Acme Studios. Alongside my role at Acme, I also work as an information and collections management consultant, advising a number of organisations on best practice for managing their collections related information and assets. So I'm going to be the host of this session. I have two co-panelists on here, which you'll see. So I'm just going to ask them to wave and say hello when I introduce them. So first of all, we have Annette Mackin. Annette is the Heritage Officer for Archives at Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives. And she is responsible for developing collections which relate to communities and community groups, particularly housing and tenants. This is very relevant for Acme because a lot of our early history is tied very closely into Tower Hamlets, housing and local communities. And before she worked for Tower Hamlets, she was one of the cataloguing archivists on a project I'm going to mention during my presentation, working in my team. And she's also previously worked with the Royal Society and the archives at the South Bank Centre. And our second co-panelist is Hannah Jones, who I'm going to ask to wave now. So Hannah is the Sector Development Manager for the East Archive, Arts and the Charities sectors for the UK National Archives. So I've invited Hannah onto this panel because the National Archives have an advisory role across the whole of the archive sector. So actually are the organisation who give practical advice and also financial support in the form of grants to help organisations actually get started on their journey with managing the information that they hold and organising it and make those first steps a little bit more easy for everybody. Okay, so just bear with me for a moment and I'm going to share my screen. So we're going to give a series of presentations. My presentation will be about the projects that we've been doing around managing our archive and actually how that work we've done to manage our archive, manage our information resources, have actually very quickly turned into a set of assets that we can use both for organisational advantage and also to benefit our audiences, which is our artist community and our peers within the arts sector. So just bear with me one moment and I shall share my screen. So I'm going to talk about organising, using and developing the Acme archive. So I've got a little bit of screen lag here, so just bear with me while the computer catches up. Okay, so the Acme archive has been developed actually throughout the course of Acme's history. So the first person to actually collect content for the Acme archive was Jonathan Harvey, who was one of Acme's co-founders. So Acme was founded 50 years ago. We're in our 50th anniversary year. And one of the earliest activities alongside providing housing that Acme took part in was the running of a contemporary art gallery in Covent Garden, which ran between 1976 and 1981, at the point at which the local council suddenly put the rent up massively, at which point we could no longer afford to run a gallery in Covent Garden. So Jonathan scrupulously collected information relating to the setup of the gallery, all of the work that was done to build the gallery, which was all done by staff in-house, everyone multitasked in those days at Acme, and also comprehensive photography and documentation of every exhibition that took place within that gallery space. So that was the first foundations of the Acme archive. But at the same time that the gallery collection was being developed as an archive collection, a large amount of information was being amassed by Acme in the course of its normal working. So in around 2006, further work was done to catalogue the photographic archive in Excel spreadsheets for Acme, and you can see 4 images up in the top right of some of our early houses and some of our early studio buildings that Acme has generated. And at the same time, we accumulated lots of working documents. So before the internet, we had to have brochures to advertise the houses and studios available, and also the services that Acme offer to artists. And in the bottom right, you'll see some of the working files of our property management department. So floor plans, maintenance lists, so the work that goes on a day-to-day basis for running an organisation that looks after a very large amount of properties. So what we have now is we have an archive that compromises our gallery archive, a photographic archive comprising images of buildings, artists, and also residency programmes, because we operate a large residency programme, hence this conference. All of our publicity and publication material. We also operated a small publishing house at one point and self-published a lot of material, and all of our organisational records. So this is what the Acme archive compromises now. And so how did we get there? Okay, so I mentioned phase 1 of organising the archive. Before the images were organised, they were all in a large series of ring binders. So the work that was done in around 2006 onwards was to organise them into a number of series relating to the different properties that we had. Artists were associated with their locations, so that's how artist images are also filed. And that is, what you see there is pretty much the entirety of every physical image we have of an Acme property. We have a very, very large digital archive that supplements this as well. So phase 2 of the organising the Acme archive started when I joined Acme at the point where we were allocated a National Archives grant to catalogue our tenancy archive. So our tenancy archive encompasses a number of areas of our archive. The archive that I inherited, there's a little bit of technical archive language on here that some of you may not be familiar with. So FONS is our collection of information, sub-FONS are those subsets, and series are little groups of information that are held within our filing system underneath the sub-FONS. So what I inherited was a archive where the gallery was at sub-FONS level, but everything else was at the same level, was underneath a general Acme archive. And assessing the material that we had in the archive, I realised that we needed to be more granular in how we arranged our sub-FONS. So we have a sub-FONS for our organisational records, one which covers properties, one which covers residencies and awards, and one which covers our very small art collection. So the art collection has a small number of paintings and one working model, well, formerly working model that was used by an artist called Stephen Crick, who displayed a number of times at the Acme Gallery. So we have one of his pieces that was used within Acme Gallery performances. And within those, we have a number of subsets of information. So we have administrative and photographic information relating to the Housing Association. We have administrative information relating to houses and studios. And we have documentation relating to how we went about organising our residencies, you know, who the sponsors were, how the funding came into place, but also the outputs from those residencies. So who those residents are, exhibitions that they put on at the project space, and including performances as well. So it's a much fuller set of information that we have been cataloguing into over the last 2 years. So within phase 2, cataloguing, this may look familiar to Annette, but we have since put the proper labels onto the boxes as well. So one of the major aspects of cataloguing the tenancy archive was the tenancy records. Tenancy records are records that relate to artists in our studios. So they will include things like the formal tenancy agreement, but also correspondence between Acme staff and the tenants. So for very, very many years, the main housing officer at Acme was a woman called Sarah Greengrass, who's very, very much loved by the artists and had her own style of communication. And what we can see here on the image is her style of statement account. So she'd always include a little visual cue about how the statement was going. So with rent that's in arrears, we got a little sad face. Everything's fine, we get a little smiley face. And we just see a little bit there about actually that relationship between Acme and our tenants, which is actually a very, almost a familiar one at that stage of working. So what we've done now is we've catalogued a significant amount of content in the archive. We've got about halfway through our tenancy records. We've catalogued our exhibitions in the Acme project space and are going through the Acme Gallery exhibitions and a number of projects. And what I'm showing you here is an example of actually how organising that information and putting in that contextual information actually really helps you think about what your organisation does. So this is a relationship map that's based on the artist Adrian Carruthers. So Adrian Carruthers was an artist who died very young, he was only 40, and he was based in a studio in our Childers Street building. So, and his experience and his family's and friends' appreciation of the support that he was provided with an Acme studio led to the foundation of an award programme for sort of like recent artist graduates. And that programme started in 2002 and is still running to this day. So the latest recipient was announced within the last couple of months. So here we can see that within the records that we've catalogued, we have a link from Adrian Carruthers' individual tenancy to the general Childers Street tenancies, and also a link through his family correspondence to the Adrian Carruthers Awards. We have 2 Adrian Carruthers Awards recipients as examples here. There's over 20 now. So for these, we have Sybil Baltzer, who also, after her award, took on a tenancy that extended beyond her award, again at Childers Street. So it shows the development of that relationship. With Revati Man, we have the documentation and the images relating to her project exhibition that took place at the Acme project space. So that was the second exhibition that took place in that project space, which is now home to Water Italia in Bethnal Green. And we, from tracing the Acme project space, we see the very first exhibition that was held there, which was the Dance of the Techno Polar Bear by Howard, whose surname I have not written down, but he was the first recipient of the Jessica Wilkes Award. And Jessica Wilkes, which takes us back to our tenancies, was a Acme Houses tenant. And again, her family created a fund for an award for a number of years to benefit young artists. So what we see here is that by putting in our catalogue records and categorising our information and keywording, we can actually build up full networks of the impact of the work we do as organisations, and also how things are connected up and how people are connected up without, where we wouldn't have realised those connections if we hadn't actually written them all down in a structured way. So I'm going to go on to a couple of other ways in which we've been using the Acme archive from our cataloguing. Just bear with me while the screen catches up again. Okay, so this was something that I produced quite recently. So one of the huge sets of resources we have relating to the early tenancies is the Acme Property Register, which listed every single Acme house, and that ranged from 1 right up at the top of the screen, so the blue, this is a heat map, to around 130 in Tower Hamlets. So Tower Hamlets really was the hub of, and all of these houses were managed by a very small team of 5 people in the early days of Acme. And the artists in those houses actually self-managed fairly well. Some are still in their houses. William Rayburn, the filmmaker, is still in his house in Tower Hamlets on the Lincoln estate. So we see that by actually cataloguing our property register and all of our side of the transfer records from the GLC for each of those properties. So the transfer record to the GLC gives the address of the property, the scheme under which it was being made available to Acme. So these were all houses that were essentially scheduled for demolition at some point in the near to mid future. So they were always meant to be temporary. And it also listed the sheer amount of work that each artist would have to do to actually get that home into a state where they could occupy it. But people took those on because they were offered a peppercorn rent, and it built this huge community of artists who supported each other. And the hub of that was actually in Tower Hamlets, with a huge number of properties. And we can actually see that it does actually radiate out quite evenly from Tower Hamlets, with Hackney and Southwark actually being the next most populous areas. Large numbers also in Waltham Forest and also in Islington, which were brought on due to housing schemes, road building schemes. So a number of roads that were due for demolition, some of which did get demolished in East London to build the M11 link. and some which didn't get demolished in Islington for the extension of the M1 right down through Archway. So that extension never happened. So those houses are still there to this day. So by actually cataloguing all of those sheets and listing them according to the boroughs, we're able to actually do a count of all of these houses and produce a heat map and actually present information back to our sort of co-founders about actually this is the evidence of how houses were spread. So what you knew anecdotally, we can actually see here in physical evidence. And I'm going to move on to some of the more outward-looking uses of our archive. So one of the strands that we've had for 50 stories, for the 50th anniversary, is 50 stories from the Acme archive. So these are stories that are released on a weekly basis. We've had a break this week because the conference has been running and the team that support us in putting the material out are very heavily booked up with the conference. But it's a story that's provided each week, which gives a view or which gives a little snippet of something that Acme has done through its history. So we start off, of course, with the beginnings with Jonathan and David outside Devon's Road, but within this we've covered exhibitions at the Acme Gallery, including actually the looking at actually how visible women artists were in that period of time, and work that the artist Claire Smith did in actually increasing visibility of women artists in 1980 with a very well regarded pair of exhibitions she put on then. We've got sort of material relating to the Acme Echo, which was the very first Acme newsletter, so which gives a really great picture of actually that community life between the artists. We've got stories of each of our studio buildings up there, sort of famous roads that we're associated with. So Acme was the driving force behind Beck Road, which is now known as the Road of Artists. So it was Acme who got all of that community together and actually campaigned to save the road, which is now a conservation area for the work that was put in by those artists in looking after the structure of those buildings. So I'd encourage everyone to go and actually have a look at this. The stories are actually quite light to touch, but what they are is a way for people who aren't experts on Acme or experts at searching for information or finding a story-led way of looking into the sort of more detailed information that we have, say, around the Stephen Crick's exhibitions at the Acme Gallery, or how we did our development programme in the early 2010s about building sort of 4 new studio buildings with Arts Council funding at that time, and changed the way that we developed our studios. So those are some of the ways in which we have actually been making use of our archive as we catalogue it, because we don't have to wait for everything to be complete before we actually start seeing the benefits and start communicating about what we have. You know, we don't have to have a perfect, complete catalogue before we start telling people about it. And that's one of the key things I think we need to take away from this. It doesn't have to be perfect before you start using it and talking to people. So I'm just going to be moving on now to a little bit about how we've been developing the archive recently, once the screen catches up. And after that, I'll hand over to Annette. Sorry, this is being very slow. Okay, so in terms of developing the archive, it's our 50th anniversary. So this is a screen grab from our website, which is about our artist engagement events. So we've held 2 significant artist engagement events yet, and we're about to launch our 3rd. So the first one was a open studio event at the Robinson Road Studios, which is an old toothbrush factory in Bethnal Green. And it was home to the Acme office for a while. So at the Open Studio weekend, we had a small archive exhibition, which we hosted underneath the old Acme office. And we invited artists who'd been at Robinson Road, past and present, to join us for that event. And the most recent one was what you see the flyer for here, which was an online event we held for artists who'd been in Acme houses and studio buildings which no longer exist. So there's no home area for them to go to for an engagement event. So we held it online and we had some great attendance there. And our next event is actually going to be an archive hub, which is open for a few weeks within our building in Shoreditch at Allsman Road, where all artists from East London studios will be invited to come along and look at material from the archive and drop off material for the archive. This is using the mouse is far more effective than the next button. Okay, so, and what you can see here is a selection of the material that has been contributed so far from our attempts to collect. So the picture at the top left is an artist called Mary Spence, who's one of our artists at Robinson Road. We actually use this one during the exhibition as it's an example of actually the artist experience of the work that Acme did. The day she moved back into her studio after we'd done a major renovation job, and the artists hadn't had access to their studios for a while. And it was accompanied by some testimony from her about the joy that they felt about coming back into their studio spaces. I thought it was a lovely example of the artist experience. At the bottom, we have a written contribution by an artist called Deborah Duffin. So Deborah worked within the Acme office for a while. She actually ran sort of bookings for the gallery that was run by Acme for a very short period of time, but then was taken over by the showroom for artists to host their own exhibitions. She wrote a book about actually how to practically go about organising an exhibition, because they weren't taught that at art college in those days. But she also lived on Beck Road, and so she wrote a nice piece about her reminiscences of moving into that house, renovating it, what it was like working in the Acme office, and, you know, the sheer joy that she actually got out of the experience. And on the right, we one of our artists who was at Robinson Road but has since moved to another of our studio buildings, which is close to where she lives, actually, as her last act in her studio at the time, did an installation for us, which she has donated materials for that to our archive, which is absolutely wonderful. And it's about her daily reminiscences of Robinson Road. So this shows pictures that she took over a period of time of the corner in Robinson Road where artists swap stuff that they don't want anymore, and how that changes over time. But it includes things like her memories of the local kids who lived in the area and them shooting peas through her window every summer, and her journey to and from the studio and the things that artists leave behind. So it was just a wonderful set of just an artist's memories of a specific location. And so we've been collecting these through the anniversary year, and we're going to carry on developing the archive using the existing material we've got from the archive as provocations to actually spur on memories for those artists. So, okay, and with that, I'm going to ask Annette to unmute herself.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so thank you, Marion, for your introduction and your presentation. It was really good to see how much the Acme collection is developing and making those really interesting collections. It's really nice to see. Yes, so my name's Annette, and I am the Heritage Officer Archives here at Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes, and I'm going to speak briefly about the sort of things that we do here and the archives, but then I'm going to focus a lot more on how our collections have been used by artists to as a sort of creative reinvention or a creative reuse of our archives here. So yeah, so could I have slide 1, please? So this is our building. Just thought I'd introduce that. I don't know if anybody's visited us here before. We're on Bancroft Road in Mile End. We've been here since, a library has been here since 1902, but the Tower Hamlets Archives, as we know it now, it was established here in 1988. So it's 35 years old, and that was the amalgamation of a number of smaller local history collections which existed in other libraries, developed over the years when that predated Tower Hamlets. That's when it was the Metropolitan Borough of Stepney, of Poplar and Bethnal Green. So 3 distinct sort of bodies, and they did their collections in a, in an administrative way. But when Tower Hamlets merged and became a borough in 1965, that's when all the records started coming together, and from then on records were grouped under that administrative hierarchy. And so yeah, we are the place of deposit for Tower Hamlets Council. So I'm a council employee technically. We collect their records, we take in transfers from them, we take in things that have been found from their predecessor bodies. And our records go back over 500 years. So this is we're talking about the various earliest records of settlements in what was Stepney, parish of Stepney, right up until the present. So we have a lot of material. We have vestry books, minute books, personal papers of residents, businesses, institutions, societies. And top of that, all the council records, so building control files, which Marion kind of mentioned. So as you've seen on Marion's heat map, there's been a lot of properties over the years which Acme have taken on. We probably have those building control files which the council were using to maintain those properties, with the GLC predecessor. So we have a lot of stuff. I'm not really good at, sometimes you hear people say, oh, if you laid everything out in a line, it would stretch to Trafalgar Square or something. I don't know how far it could stretch, but it'd be quite a long way, I think. So obviously one of the biggest stakeholders is the council. We take in their records for all kinds of things, for accountability, for transparency, for legal reasons. A lot of council departments contact us quite regularly, especially, for instance, highways, want to look at old plans of bridges, of roads. So even though records come to us from the council, it's not seen as a sort of a dead space where things are just kept, and we're very keen to promote that it's always open for use and reuse. So yes, as I say, we are a council archive, but we strive quite hard to build and develop collections that reflect the diversity of our borough, and to make sure the voices and experience, in particular of groups which have been historically and presently marginalised and oppressed, can tell their own story in their own words. That we aren't just getting top-down records about them, but the communities are speaking for themselves, and we want to empower them to do that. And so we're quite active here in building our collections. We don't just wait for the council to transfer records, or for people to go, oh, by the way, do you know, this might be of interest. We make connections with community groups. I'm from Tower Hamlets, so it's important for me as well to reach out to groups that I've known throughout my life, to arrange and talk to them about potentially depositing their records here, or just working with us with what the collections that they have. We really want to underline that our archive is not just a static place where things are brought to and left and consulted maybe now and again by bona fide researchers. We're a drop-in service. You can register online, it's free. We are open during the week. We really encourage people to come in and use us. and to have them to be regularly consulted and to be used in really interesting ways. And this is what my talk is going to be about. So it's going to be ways in which artists have used collections which you might not necessarily think as sort of creative, but they have used them in really, really interesting ways. So this is our building. I'm currently on the first floor. As soon as you can see behind me, some of the stuff which we do have. This is our oversized lending library. So this is our overspill area, really, because we are really at capacity for a lot of our records. And you can just see here, actually, our paintings collection. We do have actually some paintings, which we mostly developed actually in the 70s. That was actually an active collections development policy that people, the archivists and local historians were trying to collect the paintings of local artists. And we have, I don't know, people might have heard of Ray Walker. He's one of the artists who designed and painted the Cable Street mural. So we have a couple of his here, amongst others. As you can see, they've been conserved, they've been wrapped. So this is not something we can get out in the reading room kind of off the cuff, and we're quite reluctant at the minute to reopen them, just because it's a bit of a faff to get back in. But they have been digitized and they are available to view on Art UK website. I'm not really going to be talking about those, but they're quite interesting. Please do take a look on Art UK for those. I just want to talk about some of the ways in which we work with community. So can I have slide 2, please? So this is on our website. This is on our ideastore.co.uk/local history. I just want to just briefly, the Idea Store is, I don't know how many people know about Tower Hamlets very much, but around the turn of the millennium, the library services became underneath the umbrella of the Idea Stores. So there are several of those now across the borough, and they work as libraries, but also learning hubs, and they're incredibly popular. They do ESOL courses, obviously libraries, after school clubs, reading for children. So just that's where we sit in, and it's been really useful for us actually advocating for us as a service, because we're not sitting alone like a lot of local authority archives are. We're sitting in quite a popular set of other information establishments, and we work quite closely with them. So if you are in Tower Hamlets, if you're a resident, or if you just know the area, we are going to be working with the Idea Stores to put on little local history displays about their area as well. So that's just what the Idea Stores is, in case anyone was wondering. Okay, so this is on our website, and this was put together, I can't take any credit for this, was put together by our Heritage Officer for Learning and Participation, Genova Messiah. And this is a really excellent guide, which we direct a lot of our community groups to. It's just giving some practical support to promote best practice and empower them really to look after their own collections, because we don't want there to be these hard boundaries. We're going to, with the archive, you give stuff to us, we're going to look after it, and this is how we're going to do it. We want people to not to kind of demystify what archiving is, kind of get their heads around what they have, because sometimes people sort of panic and think, oh, this is going to be an archive, I must laminate this picture, or I must, you know, print all of this stuff out, you know, it's going to get lost if it's online. So we're just trying to make things manageable for communities, so they're not going to be overwhelmed by what they have, and that we're not just saying, no, thank you, we're going to actually take care of this now. It's you know, it's fine. So please do take a look at it, and if you know of any artists, I mean, I know Art 360 also have something similar to this, where they do advocate and talk to artists about managing their own collections. If you know of any other community groups, or just people, you know, like particularly older people who might be thinking of, you know, oh, I've got all this stuff, what should I keep, what should I do with it? It's really easy to use, and it's been really popular. Like the groups I've worked with and I'm talking to about records that are going to eventually be deposited with us, this has really helped focus their minds. So this is one of the important ways in which we do build our collections, but also we're building collections in the community, because we do know that, you know, there are lots of silences in the archive, and that the majority of material is out there, you know, and we want to make sure that it's looked after and that it's going to be accessible for the future. Could I have slide 3, please? Couldn't talk to you without mentioning our online catalogue. This is our online catalogue. It sits within our it's linked to from our webpage, but it also has a lot of interesting guides. So if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed with what we might have, you go, oh, I really want to know what you have to do with music. Then we have a guide which says all of the collections which to do with music that we have. Or if you go, I really want to know about, African Caribbean communities, what do you have? We have a guide for that. So please do have a look at our catalogue. As Marion said, the immense amount of work that goes into putting catalogues together. It is, we all have backlogs, loads of backlogs, but it's, without it, we just couldn't function, because how would you know what we have? How do we know where it is? So please do have a play around with it if you're interested in us. We do, once again, like Marion was saying, it's the connections that get made, which is really important, because you might be looking in one bit of the collection, but it's actually a really interesting bit and a disparate piece over here, but the catalogue has brought them together for you. So that's really important for us. So bear with me. So yes, I'm just going to now go on to our public programs and our outreach, really. Once again, can't take any credit for a lot of that. That is done by our heritage officers, learning and participation, our heritage manager. Mostly, obviously, we do work that I do, developing collections, obviously plays a part in that. And we also have inputs in how things get put on. But there's been some really excellent events and exhibitions that have taken place this year, are taking place, and will take place, which I think is really good to flag up about how collections can and have been activated. We are a very small team. We're actually quite okay for a local archive, but we're still quite small. A few of us are part-time, and so I think we do work really hard to put on the level of quality and the amount of work that goes into these public programs, and we couldn't do it without partnering with external stakeholders, particularly artists, curators, and our partners in universities as well, who help to formulate these events. So could I have slide 4, please? Okay, so I just want to talk about an exhibition which took place earlier this year. It's called Living in Fear of Quicksand. It's by an artist called Maria Amadou. And this exhibition, I think, really showed the potential for how archive collections can support memory work and creative inspiration for Tower Hamlets residents. Maria grew up on the Lincoln estate in Bow, which Marion mentioned. It's where William Raban still lives, and he did a talk with us for this exhibition, which is available on our YouTube page, which she also mentions Acme, how could you not? And so Maria grew up on Lincoln Estate in Bow, and this exhibition was a creative exploration of the documents which explored the physical development of the estate. So this we have here on the screen is a file from our building control files. It's a bunch of documents which were created for administrative purposes for the development of the Lincoln estate and its ongoing maintenance. And it could, this could look quite potentially dry. It's a maintenance document. It had a very specific use, but Maria used it, activated it into her own personal narrative growing up on the estate, and used it to inform her artwork, which was on display then at the Nunnery Gallery in Bow. The archive material that she chose was here. And then you went on this journey, you walked through the East End, you walked through Bow, and you went to Nunnery Gallery, and you saw the creative end point of what it was going through these archives. And so, as I mentioned, crucially, the exhibition didn't stand alone. It had a number of events which went alongside it. I mentioned the William Raban talk, which he talked about his experience of living on the Lincoln estate, how things have changed over the years, changed massively. Mary mentioned, the peppercorn rent, that kind of thing, and to now how the major housing crisis we have now. So the exhibition was very much about the now. And so the events we hoped were going to bring together people to have discussions and interventions about the now and what this means for East London at the present. We had zine making workshops where we had the Mayday rooms came with us for that, so they provided some material, we provided some material, and participants made zines in response to local history collections and the collections of Mayday rooms around housing, around protests. And we took those zines into the archive. So they were accessions, and now they're sitting somewhere behind me. So that was quite nice. That was kind of the reciprocal process of it coming from an archive, and then eventually things being brought back into the archive again, and eventually they'll hopefully be reused again at some point, you know. So that was really, really interesting. Could I have slide 5, please? So this is the Globe Town mural. This was launched in July this year. It was a partnership between the council and the Whitechapel Gallery and an artist called Shiraz Baiju, a local artist. And it's a piece of public art commissioned, which was for going into archives and looking at images and creating something from archives. So he worked with us a lot, looking at images to do with Bengali migration, Bengali communities, textile work, so workers in textile factories, things like plants in the area, street scenes he worked on. He also we went to other archives, so he went to Museum of London, Greenwich Museum as well. So it's a collage of archive material. It's actually not too far from the archive. It's around the corner. I didn't realise it had been put up. It was quite a nice surprise to see it. So this is another way in which these images, which sort of sit in our image collection, which is done by our library classification scheme, which is sitting in all different little parts of the classification scheme, how actually he's brought it all together by coming into the archive and creating this piece of artwork, which is now on display in East London. And so it reflects a range of historical themes that have underpinned the area and that are still ongoing. So protest, political movement, trade, industry, empire, and housing, of course. So that's that. Could I have slide 6, please? So this is our current exhibition. I'm really glad I've got a chance to talk about it. Once again, it's the hard work of our heritage manager Tamsin Bookie and our heritage officers Genova Messiah and Sanjida Alam worked really hard on getting this together, partnering with Queen Mary and of course the artists themselves, Alistair Levy, Emily Peasgood and Simon Tariq. So this is Everything is Different, Nothing Has Changed. It's a sound installation. It's a sound arts installation where these 3 artists have over a period of several months listened to and accessed sound recordings held in our archives dating back to 1962, and these sound recordings were mainly based around oral history recordings of Jewish and Bengali migrants to the East End. They're very intimate, personal accounts, and they've been revisited by these three artists in really interesting ways, in really ways which preserve their sort of their archival basis, I guess. They've tried to preserve it as being this is an archive listening that, you know, they've done that in really interesting ways, which I'll just talk about. So they've taken a different approach to recordings, and it's a really brilliant interplay between the past and the present, and it really foregrounds the archives as a means of discussing issues which are going on today. So Emily, her one is called When We Were Young, and she's used oral history recordings of school children and gotten children now to re-record them, and she's asking people to write, visitors to the collection, to write their memories onto clothes, which can then be hung up onto this washing line. So hers is very much taken inspiration from not just the recordings but from images in our collection to do with washing lines and domestic chores and women's work activity. She was really she really took done that really well, really interestingly explored. Simon's piece is Delayed Lines, and it's using oral histories overlaid with field recordings of noises from current Tower Hamlets. So just went around with a recorder hearing these sort of ambient noises and sounds of how Tower Hamlets sounds today. And and she's contextualized this with 3 banners which have transcriptions and translations of some of the oral histories, and she's done this in a way, you have to see it really, which captures the cataloguing structure and the classification structure of the library as well. Once again, like maintaining where these came from, but in a really creative way, which I think is really, really cool. Alistair has used a decommissioned microfilm reader so people can look at fiche while they listen to oral history recordings based around the Jewish East End, which touch on politics, racism, and music, which is really interesting. So a lot of the Yiddish music hall documents is you can view as well alongside oral histories. And so once again, this sits within a programme of events. We've got one happening this evening. So please do take a look on our website, what's on for the programme of events that's coming up. There's walking tours. This is just I'm not just trying to tell people to come to the exhibition, but I'm just trying to, it's really good. But yeah, so it sits alongside a programme of events to really underpin the discussion points that this exhibition raises, and once again to kind of foreground it in that it's been activated for a reason. We want it to have a continual reactivation. We want people to come back and revisit these sounds, to revisit the exhibitions and the material that was created as well. And could I have slide 7, please? Okay, so this is our upcoming project, Communities of Liberation, which is just about to start. We've just recruited a research and engagement lead who's going to be working on this, and I'm really excited about this. So this is going to be a research project and a public art project, leading into a public art project at the end. And so this project has its origins in the Black Lives Matter movement, which took place, started about 3 years ago internationally, and the council set up a BAME commission to engage residents on their lived experience of racial inequalities in the borough. And from this, it was agreed to establish a programme of research, cooperation, and public engagement, leading to an installation of a new public artwork which commemorates the borough's role in the slave trade. So this project is going to focus on the years in which the transatlantic slave trade was going on, so from early modern to sort of early to mid 19th century thereabouts. Obviously, things don't have that a containable time frame, so it'll be a bit long after. But that person's going to research in our collections instances of hitherto uncovered instances of African Caribbean lives in the East End, and then use that to conduct workshops with African Caribbean people to then feed into a public, what should be a public artwork commemorating Tower Hamlets, or what is Tower Hamlets' role in the slave trade. And so they're going to be identifying key sites of liberation, community, and resistance in present-day Tower Hamlets as well. And I think using the word liberation was quite important because it's about something happening positive. It's not just about a Black History Month project or something. It's going to be something that is meant to be talking to people about what they're using research, using archives, using art to talk to people about their lives and experiences today, and using the heritage sources to do that. So that's going to be going on, I think, for the next 18 months. So if you're a resident in Tower Hamlets, do keep an eye on this. And also there's a similar kind of, if you're interested in this in general, there's a similar kind of exhibition going on at the London Metropolitan Archives at the minute. That's London-wide, about African lives from early modern onwards. I'd really recommend it. But that's just been a quite brief overview of how our collections here have been used and will be used to make a sort of creative renewal and to be interpreted by artists and anybody really in quite interesting ways, and in ways which you wouldn't necessarily think of for an archive. So our main uses are, research, family history, as I say, council asking us. So we really do want to amplify that this isn't just sort of local history as it's sort of sitting there and it's really old. We want it to be used and to be relevant to people today.
That's great. Thank you, Annette. Okay, so I'm now going to ask Hannah to unmute herself, and we will move on with Hannah's presentation.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. So as the slide says, I'm Hannah Jones. I am one of a team of sector development managers at the National Archives, and I'll explain a little bit about that role and what we do. So the archive is the National Archives is predominantly the archive of central government. So we collect in records from the government, relating to the administration of all of the different functions that government carries out. Our records go back to Doomsday Book and before, and will go up as far as tweets that came out of some of the government departments yesterday. So we take pretty much everything from 1,000 years of history, essentially. But I'm not going to talk about the collections that we hold at TNA today. What I'm actually going to talk about is the role that I and colleagues work in, because we also have other responsibilities at the National Archives, and that includes the sort of leadership and advisory function for the archive sector in England. And that's the bit of the National Archives that I work in. So my role as sector development manager is kind of as a point of contact between individual archive services or archive holding organisations and the National Archives. So I'm a sort of first point of contact for anyone if they've got questions, they've got queries, they're looking for advice and guidance on how to establish an archive or how to run their archive. We will try and offer advice, signpost best practice, highlight if there's any legislation which is relevant, and so on and so forth. So the way that we do that is myself and the other colleagues in the team all have a regional focus. So my region is the east and southeast of England, and I've got colleagues who cover all the other English regions as well. But then on top of that, we also have what we call an area of focus, and that's a more thematic focus on particular strands of archives. And one of my responsibilities is arts archives. I also currently covering charity archives while a colleague of mine is away on maternity leave, but we won't be talking much about charity archives today, so we'll just focus on the arts archives. Now, the range of services that we work with at National Archives is vast. So in addition to local government organisations like Tower Hamlets that Annette's already explained, we will also work with university archives, hospitals, charities, businesses, schools, other organisations like Acme, and all points in between, local communities, etc., etc. So the advice that we will always try and give out will try to be tailored to the specific aims and objectives of that archive service or that archive holding organisation. There is no one single blueprint for this is how you must run your archive. We will always try and offer tailored advice depending on, how that archive functions and the different responsibilities and the different focuses within that organisation. So that's a little bit about what we do. So if we can move on to the first slide, please. Lovely. So as I said, one of my areas of focus is arts archives. What I wanted to do, first of all, was just highlight that we have got specific advice on the National Archives website, looking at arts archives. Now, as I said, the range of advice that we give, we will always try and we won't try and make it specific. We will try and give you good introductory advice, where to get started, where to look next, etc., etc. So if you have a look at the link that Towan has just added online, that's a sort of starting off point, and it will take you off in various directions. So there's a section in the advice for arts pages on getting started. There's a section on copyright and intellectual property. There's a section on thinking about your digital records, so that it's very much a jumping off point, and we're always happy to offer additional advice as well. And I'm going to come back to this page at the end because I'm also going to talk about the case studies that we've got. But what I'm going to do now is run through 3 different examples of archive services and the way that they've used their collections to engage with different audiences and stakeholders, and the sort of different ways that an arts archive or the archive of an arts organisation can actually be used in a range of different ways to sort of inspire creativity or to help promote the sort of brand or the organisational focus. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So the first example I wanted to point to this afternoon is the National Theatre. So National Theatre have got an in-house archive. And one example in particular, which is a fantastic example of how they've been able to use the in-house archive in the last few years, is NT Live. Which is their online viewing platform for recordings of NT performances. So this has been available for a while, but it really came into its own during the pandemic, because obviously National Theatre, along with organisations across the country, had to close down at incredibly quick notice. But NT Live enabled the National Theatre to keep reaching audiences, to keep broadcasting recorded performances, and really opened up a lot of NT performances to new audiences. It was quite interesting. I spoke to a couple of the archives team at sort of the end of 2020 about how they'd been able to use the archive at NT Live or for NT Live. And they were sort of saying that because people were looking for opportunities for something a bit different when we were all in the depths of the lockdown, people started almost making the NT Live viewings on a Thursday night sort of occasion watches. So they'd kind of some people would like mock up little tickets and sort of have bowls of snacks laid out and all sorts. So they really made it seem like a night of going to the theatre. So it was really interesting in that the National Theatre were able to use their high quality broadcast quality recordings of NT performances to sort of fill that gap in performances, and it had incredible results. They had a really positive response to it. I think originally it was due to run for sort of 6 or 8 weeks, and it actually sort of ran for in excess of 15 weeks, I think. So really sort of they really built some incredible momentum. They also found that the actual audience segmentation that they were getting from the NT Live performances was significantly different to your traditional audience who would actually physically go and visit the National Theatre. So they saw a really significant increase in attendance and participation from audience members under 35, which is something that you don't usually get huge numbers of attendees at National Theatre. So it's had a really significant impact for them, and it's helped the archive kind of gain its reputation within the rest of the National Theatre, because I think before they perhaps had a little bit of a perception that perhaps some people in the theatre didn't really sort of know what the archive could do or what it did on a daily basis. So actually them being able to step in and sort of, as I said, fill that void in performances and actually going, yeah, we've got really high quality broadcast quality performances that we can share with the broadcast team. You know, we can kind of build that audience engagement, was really, really valuable to them. I am just going to add a quick caveat there. As I said, the NT Live recordings are incredibly high quality. They are, you know, recorded with a full film crew, etc., etc. So the quantity of online storage that they need is vast. So if you're sat there watching this and thinking, oh, I like that idea, you know, can we do that with some of our own material? I think I would caveat it with going, obviously you need to be aware of things like copyright and intellectual property rights in terms of performances and who wrote the pieces and etc., etc. And also we'd advise that you have a really good digital preservation infrastructure to be able to actually store and make available that digitized content. So, you know, but that's some of the things that actually gaining reputation internally at the National Theatre, the archive have been able to do, of actually going, we need investment in our digital preservation infrastructure because this is the kind of stuff you want us to keep and you want us to make available. So that's one of the examples. If we can go on to the next slide, please, and another example of a quite different archive service and how they're using their collections. So this is a tweet that I grabbed from the University of Kent Archives and Special Collections. And this is just one particular costume from a collection that they've got relating to the history of pantomime. So University of Kent, one of their specific collecting focuses is theatre and performance archives. And this particular costume is taken from a collection called the David Drummond collection. David Drummond was a bookseller, a collector, and a pantomime enthusiast, and he collected a vast collection of playbills, scripts, costume designs, sketches, ephemera, all relating to the history of pantomime. So he was one of the foremost collectors in the country. And this came to University of Kent a few years ago after David Drummond died. It's currently being catalogued. Marion mentioned at the beginning that Acme were successful in getting funding from the National Archives. This is another project which has been funded by one of the National Archives cataloguing grants. So there's an archivist working on the Drummond collection at the moment. But what's quite interesting about the Drummond collection and the way that it's being used within the university and more widely with local communities is the fact that it does include this strong focus on costume. And it's been used to sort of generate discussions, to engage with audiences that perhaps wouldn't traditionally engage with a university archive service. So it's prompted discussions and research around queer identities and pantomime dames and principal boys, and you know, sort of issues that are coming to the forefront. But University of Kent have been able to use this collection as actually a relevant way of tying in with some of those conversations and engaging with new audiences and communities to explore some of those ideas. So it's quite an interesting way that the collection, which could be seen as quite a traditional collection in ways, has actually been used to develop those relationships with different communities. And if we can go on to the next slide, please. So the final example that I just wanted to signpost this afternoon was the archive held at the Royal Albert Hall. And in this instance, it's really interesting to see how the Royal Albert Hall's archive is very much seen as a corporate asset. Marion used the word asset in her introduction to this session. And I think it's such an important term to bear in mind when you're thinking about your archive collection, how you might be able to utilise it. The Royal Albert Hall archive is particularly interesting because it's only 12 years old. It's only been established just over a decade, but what they've achieved in that time has been really quite impressive. What you might be able to see on the screen is that they've got these buttons along the top that say search our events history, search our performances. What they've actually got is a full performance database. So the archive gets a copy of every single programme of every event that runs at the Royal Albert Hall. And I think Royal Albert Hall runs something like over 300 events a year. So, you know, they have a vast range of performers coming through their doors, you know, every year. That performance program gets added to their performance database. So they have a full, comprehensive overview of every performance that's taken place within the building. And that is very much recognised within the Royal Albert Hall as a way of enhancing their corporate brand and their corporate identity. So not only are they able to use it to tell stories of the sheer range of events that Royal Albert Hall have staged over the years, from concerts to tennis matches to suffragette meetings and, you know, everything in between, but it also means that they're able to give quite a personal touch to performers. So they're actually, the team at the archive will actually quite often get an email from the events team going, we've got, you know, X composer, or we've got X conductor performing in the proms tonight. How many times before have they been to the Royal Albert Hall? And Royal Albert Hall can look on the database and say, yeah, this is his 10th time visiting Royal Albert Hall. And the events team can actually build that into their engagement with the performers. So actually they're able to give something of a little bit more of a personal touch. So it's very much recognised within the hall as to how the archive can enrich and enhance that relationship with the individual performers. I think the other thing that the Royal Albert Hall are really good at is using their archive to support their business functions. When I say business functions, I sort of mean the activities, you know, relating to just keeping the building running, and, you know, supporting their infrastructure. So a really good example of that is the copies that they've got. They've got the scans, they've also got the originals, but they've had them all scanned, of the Victorian designs for the construction of the Royal Albert Hall. Royal Albert Hall is a Grade 1 listed building. Obviously it's in the heart of London. They're always looking for more space. So they did, you know, they've done major expansion projects, but they're all down in the sub basements. You know, they keep digging down and digging down and digging down to create more space. And obviously the expense of researching under a Grade 1 listed building to find out what's underneath and what's in the basements, etc., would be vastly expensive and time consuming. But the fact that the archive actually has access to the original building plans obviously helps that process, because they're actually able to work with the buildings teams and the construction teams and actually go, here's what we know is under the building, you know, here are the foundation blocks, this is where the wiring is, this is where the pipe work is, etc., which all helps with that, you know, supports those wider functions of the corporate functions of the hall, in terms of being able to you know, expand the hall's offer, etc. And it's quite interesting because those building plans, which were scanned partly for preservation, so that, you know, the originals didn't fall to pieces through repeated handling, have been used for things like supporting and informing the building projects, but they've also subsequently been used in quite different ways. So some of the details from the building plans have been copied and used in some of the I think one of the bars or cafes in Royal Albert Hall. So actually some of the original building design have been repeated and echoed in sort of refurbishment projects and things like that. And they've also been used on things like merchandise. So details of some of the sort of decorative flourishes around the hall have been reproduced and put on merchandise objects. So again, that's another way that items from the archive are supporting a whole range of functions within a particular service. So those were my 3 examples. As I said, we're just going to jump back to the Advice for Arts archives pages. As I said, this is freely available on the TNA website. Please go and have a look, help yourself. So as I said, there's the Advice for Arts archives pages. So that's very much a sort of jumping off point. That's a getting started, you know, things to think about, etc. But the other thing I wanted to signpost this afternoon was the case studies. So this was a suite of case studies that we had produced for us about 18 months ago. And it was looking at a range of services, again, whole range of different functions. As you'll see, there's local government archive services like Archives Wigan and Lee, or Dorset Record Office on there. And then there's also arts organisations like Royal Albert Hall or the Royal Ballet School who've got an archive collection within their organisation. And there are a range of case studies in there looking at different ways that those archive services have been able to use their collections in a range of different ways. So the Dorset History Centre one, for example, actually looks at how they used the archive collection of Dame Elizabeth Frink, the sculptor, and used that as the basis for actually developing a collecting programme around artists in Dorset. So they sort of used that as a catalyst, and they've then built upon that. Whereas the Royal Ballet School case study is something quite different, and that's actually using one specific item that they uncovered in the Royal Ballet School's archive collection, which was an early piece of choreography by one of the founders, and 5 students actually recreated the performance and put on a performance of that. So there's just some ideas in there. If you were looking for ideas or inspiration of different ways that you might be able to utilise your organisational archive, they might give you some inspiration. But yeah, please let us know what you think, and if you know of any other really good examples, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for the moment as we move into the Q&A session for this. So we have a couple of questions from one of the participants here. So I'm just going to highlight those in turn. So the first question should now be visible to all participants. And that's a question from Stuart Mays. And the question is, I'm interested to know if any of the Tower Hamlet Local History Archive artist projects are or have been directly connected to or made in collaboration with artist residency programmes.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the question. The current ones I mentioned, there isn't a direct connection as far as I'm aware. They were developed either sort of partnerships between us, sometimes Queen Mary's, the artists themselves, steering groups. I'm not aware of a direct connection for residencies, and it hasn't been the kind of foreground. But that's a really interesting point. If at some, because I think that could work quite well, and if at some point in the future there was something could be done with artist residencies programs and sort of going to an archive and doing something with the collections. I don't know in the past. I mean, I started here in January, so that's why things have been also 2023 focused. But I'm not sure in the past. I mean, we did have about 2019, we had an exhibition called Painting the Hamlets, which a lot of these images were on display in our exhibition hall. But to my knowledge, it hasn't, Stuart, no. And I think that's an interesting, area to explore in the future, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. And so the second question that we have from Stuart is can you speak to the significance and or potential of archival activities for artist residencies? So I can start off on a couple of examples that I know of for this, for other organisations other than Acme. So the first organisation that I'm going to mention is Qubit. So Qubit are another studio provider within London who also have a gallery space, and one of their programs that they have within Qubit is a residency program, which is it's art curatorial rather than pure artist. And that curatorial program is run in association with Goldsmiths, and they have a project which runs, I think runs over 2 years. And those projects actually make active use of the archival resources that have been gathered by Qubit to produce exhibitions. So I went to the exhibition output of the residency that finished last summer, and that actually looked at the physical location of Qubit using materials that were based in the archive about their former bases. It had a really nice walking map between all of the former sites that Qubit had been based at, but that was by bringing in students from the art curatorial program at Goldsmiths to work directly with the learning team and with the archive they held there. And the other example is that I previously worked at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And one of the big programs that the V&A had over the last few years was the set up of VARI, which was the V&A Research Institute. One of the programs within that was a series of artist residencies, and one of the residents that we had as part of those programs was a data artist. So that was another example whereby gathering archival content, we actually allowed the artists that we recruited, and I was on the selection panel for that artist, we allowed her to have access to our data files to actually look at data in both quantitative and qualitative ways. So actually look at testimony rather than purely looking at statistics around the collections. So what archival activities do is it does form that basis of material for how you can run your residencies, but actually it potentially produces a set of resources for artist residents if you choose to have someone who is actually a data artist. And there are actually a very large number of artists out there who are really engaged with working with organisational information. Hannah, do you want to add any more examples around that?
Yeah, certainly. There's actually an example. I just remembered when you mentioned the data artist, we actually also had a similar installation running at the National Archives, I think last year. And that was from Michael Takeo Magruder, who actually used some of the National Archives collections as inspiration.
His work is amazing.
It is. If I just post it in the chat, you can have a look at that. But I'm also aware of a couple of the case studies that we've that I've highlighted also sort of looked at different sort of artist residencies as well. So Essex Record Office used the archive of the Marconi business and organisation to actually sort of inspire an artist in residence focusing on sort of science collections, which was really, really interesting. The other element of that was that actually the residency was again hugely impacted by COVID. So a lot of the work that the artist originally was going to do in-house actually ended up sort of taking place remotely instead, but she was able to use some of the digitized photographs and some of the resources that were already on the website to actually inspire her sort of arts and creativity. So that was a really interesting example as well. And another one that springs to mind is the work that Hereford Cathedral have done in the last few years to invite creative art students into the cathedral and use the archive and library as inspiration for sort of creative pieces as well. So that might be pieces of art, pieces of jewelry, sculpture. So again, it's sort of using those collections within the archive as a jumping off point and just seeing where it can take you.
And I actually also add actually, Annette, do you have any examples that you want to highlight that you're aware of? The South Bank are doing some really exciting things.
Yes, the South Bank do a lot of exciting things with it. Yeah. Yes. So just trying to gather my thoughts. Yeah. So at the South Bank Centre when I was there, I mean, I left because of COVID, because as Hannah said, you know, things had to stop very quickly. So that's when I finished working at the South Bank Centre. So I haven't actually been there for a number of years, but just previously, yes, they do work with quite a number of different artists within the archive. You know, we had a creative writing visual artists come in and to use our collections, just a drop in for people in the Royal Festival Hall to just create, you know, spontaneous artwork, things like that. Just at Tower Hamlets Archives, several years ago we had something called the Numbi Residencies. So it's about Numbi arts. So it's a Somali-based organisation about heritage arts, and there was a summer festival about 2019, so pre-COVID again, which there was a residency which was hosted here about that. So that is something we did do, and that's once again trying to work with communities and give them a space as well to display what they'd like to show.
And I'm just going to add a sort of another sort of like pragmatic point around this, which is it's and about actually why you should devote time to doing this within an organisation, when actually I'm aware that a lot of the organisations that host residencies, that run residencies, are already very time pressured in terms of resources. Documenting what you do and having that evidence base of what you do and what you've done, it actually helps your planning for future residencies. Having a look at the types of programs you had, and it's a fantastic evidence base for when you, because as someone who has to write an awful lot of grant applications, and with these being organisations which actually have to rely increasingly on external funding to fund residencies and fund programmes of work, actually having that evidence base, particularly a visual evidence base of the work that you have done previously and the work that you want to develop, is incredibly useful when you're putting together those many grant bids that you have to write. It's, you know, it's a great advocacy tool for your organisation when you're asking for money from someone else. And you know, these days we increasingly have to ask for money from other people to actually do the work that we do. So that's, you know, my practical point about why archival activities are really important on an organisational level. I mean, it's great to actually be able to enable the residencies in terms of the artists by providing source material, but it's really great to be able to enable the residencies by providing a funding programme for them as well. So that's the other key reason. So like, it may feel like you're spending a lot of time organising your information, but actually you can use it to your organisational benefit on a small scale. You don't have to be the Royal Albert Hall to do it, to be able to take advantage of it. We're able to take advantage of the sort of information that we've used by just analysing where we had houses previously and actually where we can actually make those professional connections. So it's, you know, we don't want to have to bring everything down to money, but actually money does actually fund what we do. And by being able to provide that additional evidence base of your programs of residencies, that gives you that additional material that you can put into those never-ending grant applications. Right, I'm just going to quickly ask, because we've got 2 minutes left of the session, about whether there are any other questions that anyone would like to raise very quickly. Type them in very quickly. And if not, if there are any sort of final points from Annette and Hannah that you'd like to make.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for inviting me to this session. It's actually my first panel. I've been on a panel before. Yes, and just about, you know, I hope this come across as, not, you know, archives don't just collect things for collecting's sake. You know, it's all about, you know, we want to engage the communities that we represent, We want people to use our collections. We want to make it as accessible as possible. We want to make it as relevant as possible. So if you've got any questions at all, we want to work with an archive, do just contact the archive you want to and speak to the archivist there, and just say what do you have, I'm really interested in this, and just start from there, because they really do want to help.
Yeah, agreed. And just to follow up on that, if you're interested in, or if you think you've got potential for an archive project, but maybe it's not, your local archive service, or maybe you think it might encompass a few different services, National Archives are always really happy to sort of engage and be that broker to kind of help establish relationships and conversations and things like that as well. So again, we're really, really happy. Just get in touch and we'll try and put you in touch with the right people.
Okay, that's great. So we have reached 3:30. So I'd like to thank Annette and Hannah very much for their contributions to this panel. Also Tuan for the regular sharing of the links as that things were mentioned, which I hope everyone's been able to take a note of. I'd like to thank you all for attending and participation in this panel. I just have one last formal thanks that I have to do, which is, just bear with me one moment. So, okay, so the obligatory thanks to all of our conference partners and sponsors who you see listed on the screen there. And with that, I'll just say thank you all for attending today. Just a reminder that the programme for the conference continues online again tomorrow. You should all have been sent a link for joining for tomorrow's session. And thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.